So to recap, I don't know why the stream cut off like it did. It only let me read 39 minutes and then cut off, so I don't actually know what it didn't, like why the stream was shut down like it was. But she it was the chapter where she gets taken to the cliff to watch her uncle and her uncle's coworkers do what they do, and then she gets attacked, but she defends herself, she fights back, she rescues herself. She does get injured, but it's not as bad as it seems to be going towards. So honestly, I don't feel like it's that horrible of a chapter in the book because it's she does get injured, but she's not actually she still fights, so she ends up okay. Um, and then her what do you call him? Sorry. Then she's back at the inn, and her aunt took care of her for a few days while she was recovering and healing, and she's upset to learn that she was asleep for days when she should have been awake, and she wanted to be awake so she could burst out of there and report what she witnessed. And that part, even that, like, it's just written with such tact that you don't really need, like, it doesn't really go into full details of it. It's not explicitly, um, it's just described a little, not fully. So it's like, the details are not there, it's just alluded to without showing anything. But considering that that was only 39 minutes and the stream was taken down, and I don't know why, I don't know what happened. Because it did say that I was live, and yet it didn't record it, or something weird. I don't know. So for now, you can't see my face because I'm wondering if this is another problem where something was assumed about my face. Okay, let's go on. Were you alone in Launceston? Of course I was alone. And you spoke to no one. I bought a handkerchief from a woman at a stall. Joss Merlin spat on the floor. All right, he said. Whatever I did to you now, you'd tell the same story, wouldn't you? You've got the advantage for once, because I can't prove if you're lying or not. Not many maids your age would spend the day alone in Launceston, I can tell you that. Nor would they drive home by themselves. If your story's true, then our prospects improve. They'll never trace the driver here. I shall feel like another drink in a moment. He tilted back his chair and pulled at his pipe. You shall drive in your own coach yet, Patience, he said, and wear feathers in your bonnet and a velvet cloak. I'm not beaten yet. I'll see the whole band of 'em in hell first. You wait. We'll start afresh again. We'll live like fighting cocks. Maybe I'll turn sober and go to church on Sundays. And you, Mary, you shall hold my hand in my old age and spoon me my food. He threw back his head and laughed, and his laugh broke short in the middle. His mouth shut like a trap, and he crashed his chair down to the floor again and stood up in the middle of the room, his body turned sideways, his face as white as a sheet. Listen, he whispered hoarsely, listen. They followed the direction of his eyes, fastened as they were upon the chink of light that came through the narrow gap in the shutters. Something was scraping gently at the kitchen window, tapping lightly, softly, scratching furtively at the pane of glass. It was like the sound made by a branch of ivy when it is broken loose from the trunk, and bending downwards, teases a window or a porch, disturbed and restless with every breath of wind. But there was no ivy on the slate walls of Jamaica Inn, and the shutters were bare. The scraping continued, persuasive and undaunted. Tap, tap, like the drumming of a beak. Tap, tap, like the forefingers of a hand. There was no other sound in the kitchen except the frightened breathing of Aunt Patience, whose hand crept across the table to her niece. Mary watched the landlord as he stood motionless on the kitchen floor, his figure shadowed monstrously on the ceiling, and she saw his lips blue through the dark stubble of his beard. Then he bent forward, crouching on tiptoe like a cat, and sliding his hand along the floor, his fingers fastened themselves upon his gun that stood against the further chair, never once taking his eyes from the chink of light between the shutters. Mary swallowed, her throat dry as dust. Whether a thing behind the window was friend or enemy to herself made the suspense more poignant. But in spite of her hopes, the thumping of her heart told her that fear was infectious, as were the beads of perspiration on her uncle's face. Her hands wandered to her mouth, trembling and clammy. For a moment he waited beside the closed shutters, and then he sprang forward, tearing at the hinge and pulling them apart, the gray light of afternoon slanting at once into the room. A man stood outside the window, his livid face pressed against the pane, his broken teeth gaping in a grin. It was Harry the peddler. Joss Merlin swore and threw open the window. "Gee, do you come inside, can't you?" he shouted. "Do you want a bullet in your guts, you blasted fool? You've had me standing here like a deaf mute for 5 minutes with my gun trained on your belly. Unbolt the door, Mary. Don't lean against the walls there like a ghost. There's nerves enough in this house without you turning sour." Like all the men who had been badly scared, he threw blame of his own panic upon the shoulders of another, and now blustered to reassure himself. Mary crossed slowly to the door. The sight of the peddler brought back a vivid memory of her struggle in the lane, and the reaction came swift upon her. Her nausea and disgust returned in force, and she could not look upon him. She opened the door without a word, screening herself behind it, and when he came into the kitchen, she turned at once and went to the dull fire, piling the turf upon the embers mechanically, her back towards him. "Well, have you brought news?" questioned the landlord. The peddler smacked his lips in reply and jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "The country's gone up in smoke," he said. "Every cluttering tongue in Cornwall for the tomorrow to St. Ives. I was in Bodmin this forenoon. The town was ringing with it, and they're mad hot for blood and justice too. Last night I slept at Camelford, every man jack in the place shaking his fist in the air and blabbling to his neighbour. There will only be one end to this storm, Joss, and you know the name for it, don't you?" He made a gesture with his hands across his throat. "We've got to run for it," he said. "It's our only chance. The roads are poison, and Bodmin and Launceston worst of all. I'll keep to the moors and get into Devon above Gunnislake. It'll take me longer, I know that, but what are the odds to save your skin? Have you got a bite of bread in the house, missus?" "I've not touched food since yesterday afternoon." He threw his question at the landlord's wife, but his glance fell upon Mary. Patience Merlin fumbled in the cupboard for bread and cheese, her mouth working nervously, her movements clumsy, her mind anywhere but her mission. As she laid the table, she looked beseechingly at her husband. "You hear what he says," she pleaded. "It's madness to stop here. We must go now, at once, before it's too late. You know what this means to the people. They will have no mercy on you. They'll kill you without trial. For Jesus' sake, listen to him, Joss. You know I won't care for myself. It's for you." "Shut your mouth, can't you?" thundered her husband. "I've never asked your counsel yet, and if I don't ask it for now, I can face what's coming to me alone without you bleeding beside me like a sheep. So you'll throw in your hand too, Harry, will you? Run with your tail between your legs because a lot of clerks and Wesleyans are howling for your blood? Have they proved it to us? Tell me that. Has your liver conscience gone against you?" "Darn my conscience, Joss, it's common sense I'm thinking of. This part of the country has become unhealthy, and I'll go for it while it can. As for proof, we've sailed close enough to the wind these last months to be proof enough, haven't we? I've stuck to you, haven't I? Come out here today, risking my neck to give you warning. I'm not saying anything against you, Joss, but it's your stupidity that brought us into this mess, wasn't it? You got us mad drunk like yourself and led us to the shore all crazy with our brained venture that none of us planned. We took a chance in a million, and the chance came off too bloody well. Because we were drunk, we lost our heads, let stuff in 100 tracks scattered on the shore. And whose fault is it? Why, yours, I say. He smashed his fist on the table, his yellow, impudent face thrust close to his landlord, a sneer on his cracked lips. Joss Merlin considered him for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was dangerous and low. "So you accuse me, do you, Harry?" he said. "You like the rest of your hind, wriggling with a snake when the luck of the game turns against you? You've done well out of me, haven't you? Had gold to burn you never had before. Lived like a prince all these months instead of at the bottom of the mine where you belong. And supposing we'd keep our heads the other night and cleared in order before dawn, as we've done 100 times before, you'd be stucking up to me now to fill your pockets, wouldn't you? You'd be fawning on me with the rest of the sniffing curs, begging your share of the spoil, calling me God Almighty to lick my boots and lie down in the dust. Run then, if you like. Run to the tomorrow bank with your tail between your legs, and darn to you. I'll take the world on alone." The peddler forced a laugh and shrugged his shoulders. "We can talk, can't we, without cutting each other's throats? I'm not gone against you. I'm on your side still. We were all mad drunk on Christmas Eve, I know that. Let's leave it alone, then. What's done is done. Our lot is scattered, and we needn't reckon with them. They'll be too scared to show their heads and worry about us. That leaves you and I, Joss. We've been in this business, the pair of us, deeper than most, I know that. And the more we help each other, the better it will be for us both. Now that's why I'm here, to talk it over and see where we stand." He laughed again, showing his soft gums, and began to beat a tattoo on the table in his squat black fingers. The landlord watched him coolly and reached once more for his pipe. "Just what did you be driving at, Harry?" he said, leaning against the table and filling his pipe afresh. The peddler sucked his teeth and grinned. "I'm not driving at anything," he said. "I want to make things easier for us. We've got to quit, that's evident, unless we want to swing." I don't know why I thought I saw the word saving, not swing. But it's like this, Joss. I don't see the fun in quitting empty-handed for all that. There's a mint of stuff we dumped in the room yonder 2 days ago from the shore. That's right, isn't it? And by rights it belongs to all of us who worked for it on Christmas Eve. But there's none of 'em left to claim it, you and I. I'm not saying there's much value there. It's junk mostly, no doubt, but I don't see why some of it shouldn't help us into Devon, you. The landlord blew a cloud of smoke into his face. "So you didn't come back to Jamaica Inn because of my sweet smile alone, then?" he said. "I was thinking you were fond of me, Harry, and wanted to hold my hand." The peddler grinned again and shifted in his chair. "All right," he said. "We're friends, aren't we? There's no harm done in plain sinking. The stuff's there, and it'll take 2 men to shift it. The women here can't do it. What's against you and I striking a bargain and be done with it?" The landlord puffed thoughtfully at his pipe. "You're teeming with ideas, all strung out as pretty as the fancy trinkets on your tray, my friend, and supposing the stuff isn't there, after all. Supposing I've disposed of it already. I've been here kicking my heels for days, you know, and the coach has passed my door. What then, Harry boy?" The grin faded from the face of the peddler, and he tossed out his jaw. "What's the joke?" he snarled. "Do you play double game up here at Jamaica Inn? You'll find it hasn't paid you if you have. You've been mighty silent sometimes, Joss Merlin, when cargoes were run, and we had the wagons on the road. I've seen these things sometimes, and I've understood and heard things, too. You made a brilliant job of this trade, month in, month out. Too brilliant, some of us thought, for the small profit we made of it. Who took most of the risk? And we don't know how you do it, did we do? Listen here, Joss Merlin. Do you take your orders from one above you?" The landlord was on him like a flash. He caught the peddler on the point of the chin with his clenched fist. The man went over backwards onto his head, his chair beneath him, striking the stone flags with a crash. He recovered instantly and scrambled to his knees, but the landlord towered above him, the muzzle of his gun pointed at the peddler's throat. "Move, and you're a dead man," he said softly. Harry the peddler looked up at his assailant, his little mean eyes half closed, his puffy face yellow. The fall had winded him, and he breathed shortly. At the first sign of a struggle, Aunt Patience had flattened herself against the wall. Terror-stricken, her eyes searching those of her niece in vain appeal, Mary watched her uncle closely. She had no clue this time to his state of mind. He lowered his gun and pushed at the peddler with his foot. "Now we can talk reason, you and I." He leaned once more against the table, his gun across his arm, with the peddler sprawled, half kneeling, half crouching on the floor. "I'm the leader in this game, and have always been," said the landlord slowly. I've worked it from the beginning 30 years ago when we ran cargoes from the little 12-ton luggers to Padstow and thought ourselves lucky when we were 7 pence half a penny in pocket. I worked until the trade was the biggest thing in this country. From Hartland to Hale. I take orders, by God. I'd like to see the man who dared to try me. Well, it's over now. We run our course and the day is done. The game is up for all of us. You didn't come here tonight to warn me. You came to see what you could out of the smash. The inn was barred, and the little man Hartshaw rejoiced. You scraped the window there, because you knew from experience the lasp of the shutter is loose and easy to force. You didn't think to find me here, did you? You thought it would be Patience here, or Mary, and you'd scare them easy, wouldn't you? And reach for my gun where it hangs hardly on the wall, as you'd often seen, and then heck with the landlord of Jamaica Inn, you little rat, Harry. Do you think I didn't see in your eye when I flung back the shutter and saw your face at the window? Do you think I never heard you gasp with surprise, nor watched your sudden yellow grin? The peddler passed his tongue over his lips and swallowed. He threw a glance towards Mary, motionless by the fire, the round button of his eye watchful like a cornered rat. He wondered if she would throw the dice against him, but she said nothing. She waited for her uncle. Very well, he said. We'll strike a bargain, you and I, as you suggested. We'll come to handsome terms. I've changed my mind after all. My loving friend, with your help, will take the road to Devon. There's stuff in this place worth taking, as you reminded me, nor can I load alone. Tomorrow is Sunday, with a blessed day of rest. Not even to reckon as 50 ships will drag the people of this country to their knees. There'll be blinds down, and sermons, and long faces and prayers offered for the poor sailormen who come by the misadventure by the devil's hand, but they'll not be go seeking the devil or the Sabbath. 24 hours we have, Mary, my boy, and tomorrow night, when you've broken your back spading turf or turnips over my property in the farm cart, and kiss me good-bye, and Patience too, and maybe Mary there as well, why, then you can go down on your knees and thank Joss Merlin for letting you go free with your life instead of squatting on your scut in a ditch, where you belong to be, with a bullet in your black heart. He raised his gun again, edging the cold muzzle close to the man's throat. The peddler whimpered, showing the whites of his eyes. The landlord laughed. You're a pretty marksman in your way, Harry, he said. Isn't that the spot you touched on Ned Santo the other night? You laid his windpipe there, and the blood whistled out in the stream. He was good, my boy, my Ned, but hasty with his tongue, and that's where you got him, wasn't it? Close to the muzzle pressed against the peddler's throat. If I made a mistake now, Harry, your windpipe would come clean just like poor Ned's. You don't want me to make a mistake, do you? The peddler could not speak. His eyes rolled up at a squint, and his hand opened wide, and 4 fingers square, as though clamped to the floor. The landlord shifted his gun and bending down, he jerked the peddler to his feet. Come on, he said. Do you think I want going to play with you all night? It's just as a jest for 5 minutes. After that becomes burden on flesh. Open the kitchen door, turn to the right, and walk down the passage till I tell you to stop. You can't escape through the entrance to the bar. Every door and the window of the place is barred. Your hands have been itching to explore the wreckage we brought from the shore, haven't they, Harry? You shall spend the night in the storeroom among it all. Do you know Patience, my dear? I believe this is the first time we've offered hospitality at Jamaica Inn. I don't care to marry there. She's part of this household. He laughed in high good humor. His mood switched round now, like a weathercock, and batting his gun to the peddler's back, he prodded him out of the kitchen and down the dark flagged passage to the shore. The door, that had been battered in rough and ready manner by Squire Besot and his servant, had been reinforced with new planking and posts, and was now strong as if not stronger than before. Joss Merlin had not been entirely idle during the past week, and he had turned the key on his friend with a parting injunction to feed the rats, whose number was increased. The landlord returned to the kitchen, rumble of laughter in his chest. I thought Harry would turn sour, he said. I've seen it come in for weeks. Long before this mess landed on us, he'll fight on the winning side, but he'll bite your hand when the luck turns. He's jealous he's yellow-green with it, rotten through and through. He's jealous of me. They're all jealous of me. They knew I had brains and hated me for it. What are they staring at me for, Mary? You better get your supper and go to bed. You have a long journey before you tomorrow night, and I've warned you here, and now it won't be an easy one. Mary looked at him across the table. The fact that she'd not be going with him did not concern her for the moment. She might think as he liked about it, tired as she was, for the strain she had seen and done weighed heavily upon her. Her mind was seething with plans. Sometime, somehow, before tomorrow night, she must go to Alternoon. Once there, her responsibility was over. Action would be taken by others. It would be hard for Aunt Patience, hard for herself, perhaps. She knew nothing of the jingle and complexities of the law, but at least justice would win. It would be easy enough to clear her own name and her aunt's. The thought of her uncle, who sat before her now, his mouth full of stale bread and cheese, standing as he would now with his hands bound behind him, powerless for the first time in forever, with something that afforded her exquisite pleasure, and she turned the picture over and over in her mind, improving upon it. Aunt Patience would recover in time, and the years would drain away from her, bringing her peace at last and quietude. Mary wondered how the capture would be effected when the moment came. Perhaps they would set upon the journey as he had arranged, and as they turned upon the road, his laughing and assurance, and they would be surrounded by a band of men strong in number and in arms, and he struggled against them hopelessly, borne to the ground by force. She would lean into him and smile. "I thought you had brains, uncle," she would say to him, and he would know. She dragged her eyes away from him and turned to the dresser by her candle. "I'll have no supper tonight," she said. Aunt Patience made a little murmur of distress, lifting her eyes from the plain slab of bread on the plate to her for her, but Joss Merlin kicked at her for silence. "Let her stay sulky if she has no mind, can't you?" he said. "What does it matter to you if she eats or not? Starvation is good for women and beasts. It brings them to heel. She'll be humble enough in morning. Wait, Mary. You shall sleep sounder if I turn the key on you. I want no prowlers in the passage." His eyes strayed to the gun against the wall and half consciously back to the shutter that still gaped open before the kitchen window. "Fasten that window, Patience," he said thoughtfully, "and put the bar across the shutter. When you have finished your supper, you too can go to bed. I shall not leave the kitchen tonight." His wife looked up at him in fear, struck by the tone of his voice, and would have spoken, but he cut her short. "Have you learned by now not to question me?" he shouted. She rose at once and went to the window. Mary, her candle alight, waited by the door. "All right," he said. "Why are you standing there? I told you to go." Mary went out into the dark passage, her candle throwing a shadow behind her as she walked. No sound came from the stone at the end of the passage, and she thought of the peddler lying there in the darkness, watching and waiting for the day. She thought of him was abhorrent to her, like a rat he was, imprisoned among his fellows, and she suddenly pictured him with rat's claws, scratching and gnawing at the framework of the door, scraping his way to freedom in the silence of the night. She shuddered, strangely thankful that her uncle had decided to make a prisoner of her as well. The house was treacherous tonight, her very footsteps sounding hollow in the flags, and there were echoes that came unbidden from the walls. Even the kitchen, the one room in the house to possess some measure of warmth and normality, gaped back at her as she left it, yellow and sinister in the candlelight. Was her uncle going to sit there then, the candles extinguished, his gun across his knee, waiting for something, for someone? He crossed into the hall, and she mounted the stairs and followed her along the landing to the bedroom or the porch. "Give me your key," he said, and she handed it to him without a word. He lingered for a moment, looking down at her. Then he bent low and laid his finger on her mouth. "I've a soft spot for you, Mary," he said. "You've got spirit still and pluck, for all the knocks I've given you. I've seen it in your eyes tonight. If I'd been a younger man, I'd have courted you, Mary, aye, and won you too, and ridden away with you to glory. You know that, don't you?" She said nothing. She stared back at him, and he stood beyond the door, and her hands that held the candlestick trembled slightly without her knowledge. He lowered his voice to a whisper. "There's danger for me ahead," he said. "Never mind the law. I can bluff my way to freedom if it comes to that. The whole of Cornwall can come running at my heels for all I care. It's the other game I will watch for, footsteps, Mary, that come in the night and go again, and a hand that would strike me down." His face looked lean and old in the half-light, and there was a flicker of meaning in his eyes that leaped like a flame to tell her, and then dulled again. "We'll put the tomorrow between us and Jamaica Inn," he said, and he smiled, the curve of his mouth painfully familiar to her and known, like an echo from the past. He shut the door upon her and turned the key. She heard him tramp down the stairs, and so down the passage. He turned the corner, the kitchen was gone. She went then to her bed and sat down upon it, her hands in her lap, and for some reason forever unexplained thrust away her later and forgotten, side by side with the old sins of childhood and those dreams never acknowledged to the sturdy day. She put her fingertips to her lips as he had done, and let them stray thence to her cheek and back again. She began to cry, softly and secretly, the tears tasting bitter as they fell upon her hand. 13. She had fallen asleep where she lay without undressing, and her first conscious thought was of the storm that had to come again, bringing with it the rain that streamed against her window. She opened her eyes and saw that the night was still, without a tremor of wind from without or the patter of rain. Her senses were alert at once, and she waited for a repetition of the sound that had woken her. It came again in an instant, a shower of earth flung against the pane of glass from the yard outside. She swung her legs to the floor and listened, weighing in her mind the possibility of danger. If this was a warning signal, the method was a crude one, and better ignored. Someone with little idea of the geography of the inn might have mistaken her window for the landlord's. Her uncle waited below with his gun across his knee in preparation for a visitor. Perhaps the visitor had come, and was now standing in the yard. Curiosity gained the better of her in the end. She crept softly to the window, holding herself in the shadow of the jutting wall. The night was black still, and there were shadows everywhere, but low in the sky a thin line of cloud foretold the dawn. She had not been mistaken, though. The earth on the floor was real enough, and so was the figure standing directly beneath the porch, the figure of a man. She crouched by the window, waiting for his further movement. He bent again to the ground, fumbling in the barren flower bed outside the parlor window, and then he raised his hand and threw the little clod of earth at her window, spattering the pane with pebbles and soft mud. This time she saw his face, and the wonder of it made her cry out in surprise, forgetting the caution with which she had trained herself. It was Jim Merlin standing below her in the yard. She leaned forward at once, opening her window, and she would have called to him, but he lifted his hand for silence. He came closer against the wall, skirting the porch which would have hidden her from him, and he cupped his hands to his mouth and whispered up to her, "Come down to the door here, and unbolt it for me." She shook her head at him. "I cannot do that. I am locked here in my room," she told him. He stared at her, nonplussed and evidently puzzled, and he looked back at the house as though it might offer some solution of his own. He ran his hands along the slates, testing them, feeling for rusted nails used long ago for creeper that might afford him foothold of sort. The low tiles of the porch within his reach, but they had no gripping surface. He would swing his legs from the ground to no purpose. "Fetch me the blanket from your bed," he called softly. She guessed at once his meaning and tied the end of the blanket to the foot of her bed, throwing the other out of the window, where it dragged limply above his head. This time he had holding power, and swinging himself to the low roof of the jutting porch, he was able to wedge his body between it and the walls of the house, his feet gripping the slates, and in this manner haul himself up on the porch on a level with her window. He swung his legs over and straddled the porch, his face close to hers now, the blanket hanging loosely beside him. Mary struggled with the framework of the window, but her efforts were useless. The window opened only a foot or so, and he could not enter the room without smashing the glass. "I shall have to talk to you here," he said. "Come closer where I can see you." She knelt on the floor of her room, her face at the window gap, and they stared at one another for a moment without speaking. He looked worn, and his eyes were hollow like one who had not slept and would endured fatigue. There were lines in about his mouth she had not noticed before, nor did he smile. "I owe you an apology," he said at length. "I deserted you without excuse at Launceston on Christmas Eve. You can forgive me or not, as you feel, but the reason for it, this I can't give you. I'm sorry." This attitude of harshness did not suit him. He appeared to have changed much, and the change was unwelcome to her. "I was anxious for your safety," she said. "I traced you to White Hart, and was told you had entered a carriage with some gentlemen. Nothing beyond that. No message, no word of explanation. Those men were there, standing before a fire, the horse dealer who spoke with you in the market square. They were horrible men, curious, and I mistrusted them. I wonder if the theft of the pony had been discovered. I was wretched and worried. I blame you for nothing. Your business is your own." She was hurt by his manner. She had expected anything but this. When she saw him first in the yard outside her window, she thought of him only as the man she loved, who had come now to her in the night seeking her presence. His coolness damped her flame, and she withdrew inside herself at once, trusting that he had not seen the blank disappointment in her face. He did not even ask how she returned that night, and his indifference stunned her. "Why are you locked in your room?" he questioned. She shrugged her shoulders. Her voice was flat and dull when she replied, "My uncle does not care for eavesdroppers. He fears I should wander in the passage and stumble upon his secrets. You appear to have the same dislike of intrusion. To ask you why you are here tonight would be an offense, I suppose." "Oh, be as bitter as you like. I deserve it," he flashed suddenly. "I know what you think of me. One day I may be able to explain, if you're not out of my reach by then. Be a man for the moment, and send your hurt pride and your curiosity hell. I'm treading delicate ground, Mary, and for one false step will finish me. Where's my brother?" He told us he would spend the night in the kitchen. He is afraid of something or someone, and the windows and doors are barred, and he has his gun." Jim lashed harshly. "I don't doubt he's afraid. He'll be more frightened still before many hours are past, I'll tell you that. I came here to see him, but if he sits there with a gun across his knee, I can postpone the visit until tomorrow when the shadows are gone. Tomorrow may be too late." "What do you mean?" "He intends to leave Jamaica Inn at nightfall." "Are you telling me the truth?" "Why should I lie to you now?" Jim was silent. The news had evidently come as a surprise to him, and he was turning it over in his mind. Mary watched him, tortured by doubt and indecision. She was thrown back upon her now old suspicions of him. He was the visitor expected by her uncle, and therefore hated by him and feared. He was the man who held the threads of her uncle's life between his hands. The sneering face of the peddler returned to her again as words that so provoked the landlord to a flame of fury. "Listen here, Joss Merlin. Do you take your orders from one above you? The man whose wits made service of the landlord's strength, the man who had hidden in the empty room." She thought again of the laughing, carefree Jim, who had driven her to Launceston, who had swung hands with her in the market square, who had kissed her and held her. Now he was grave and silent, his face in shadow. The idea of a dual personality troubled her, and frightened her as well. He was like a stranger to her tonight, obsessed with some grim purpose she could not understand, warning him of the landlord's intended flight had been a false move on her part. It might confound the issue of her plans. Whatever Jim had done or intended to do, whether he were false and treacherous or a murderer of men, she loved him. In the weakness of her flesh, she had owed him the warning. "You'd best have a care of yourself when you see your brother," she said. "His mood is dangerous. Whoever interferes with his plan now risks his life. I tell you this for your own safety. I've no fear of Joss, nor ever had." "Perhaps not, but what if he's afraid of you?" To this he said nothing, but leaning forward suddenly, he looked into her face and touched the scratch that ran from her forehead to her chin. "Who did this?" he said sharply, turning from the scratch to the bruises on her cheek. She hesitated for a moment, then answered him. "I got them Christmas Eve." The gleam in his eye told her at once he understood, and had knowledge of the evening, because of it was here now at Jamaica Inn. "You were there with them on the shore?" he whispered. She nodded, watching him carefully, wary of speech, and for answer he cursed aloud, and reaching forward, smashed the pane of glass with his fist, careless of the splintering sound of glass and the blood that spouted immediately from his hand. The gap in the window was wide enough now for entrance, and had climbed into the room and was beside her before she realized what he'd done. He lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bed, and laid her down upon it, and fumbling in the darkness for a candle, he found her at length, and lit it, and came back to the bed and knelt beside it, throwing the light upon her face. He traced the bruises with his finger down her neck, and when she winced with the pain, he withdrew his breath quickly, and again she heard him swear. "I might have spared you this," he said, and then blowing out the light, he sat down beside her on the bed and reached for her hand, and when he held it a moment tight and gave back to her, "Why did you go with them?" he said. "They were crazy with drink. I didn't think they knew what they were doing. I could no more have stood against them than a child. There were a dozen of them or more, and my uncle, he led them, he and the peddler. If you know about it, why do you ask me? Don't make me remember. I don't want to remember. How much have they hurt you?" "Bruises, scratches, you can see for yourself. I tried to escape, and I grazed my side. They caught me again, of course. They bound my hands and feet down on the shore, and tied sacking over my mouth so that I could not scream. I saw a ship come through the mist, and I could do nothing, alone there in the wind and the rain. I had to watch them die." She broke off, her voice trembling, and turned on her side, her face in her hands. He made no move towards her. He sat silently on the bed beside her, and she felt him far from her, wrapped in secrecy. She was lonelier than before. "Was it my brother who hurt you most?" he said presently. She sighed wearily. It was all too late, and did not matter now. "I've told you he was drunk," she said. "You know better than I, perhaps, what he can do then." "Yes, I know." He paused a moment, and then once again he took her hand. "He shall die for this," he said. "His death will not bring back the men he killed. I'm not thinking of them now. If you're thinking of me, don't waste some sympathy. I can revenge myself in my own way. I've learned one thing at least, to rely on myself. Women are frail things, Mary, for all their courage. You are best out of this business now. The issue lies with me." She did not answer him. Her plans were her own, and he did not enter into them. "What do you intend to do?" he asked. "I've not made up my mind." She lied. "If he leaves tomorrow night, you have little to decide," he said. "He expects me to go with him, and Aunt Patience as well. And you? That will depend upon tomorrow." Whatever she felt for him, she could not hazard her plans into his keeping. He was still an unknown quantity. and above all else an enemy to justice. It came to her then that by betraying her uncle she might also betray him. "If I asked you to do something, how would you answer me?" she said. He smiled then for the first time, mocking and indulgent, as he had done in Launceston. Her heart lit to him once, encouraged at the change. "How can I tell?" he said. "I want you to go away from here." "I'm going now." "No, I mean away from the moors, away from Jamaica Inn. I want you to tell me you won't return here again. I can stand up against your brother. I'm in no danger from him now. I don't want you to come here tomorrow. Please promise you'll go away." "What have you got in mind?" "Something which is no concern with you, but might bring you to danger." "I can't say any more. I'd rather you trusted me." "Trust you? Good God, of course I trust you. It's you who won't trust me, you darned little fool." He laughed silently and bent down to her, putting his arms around her, and he kissed her then as he had kissed her in Launceston, but deliberately now, with anger and exasperation. "Play your own game by yourself, then, and leave me to play mine," he told her. "If you must be a boy, I can't stop you, but for the sake of your face, which I have kissed and shall kiss again, keep away from danger. You don't want to kill yourself, do you? I have to leave you now. It'll be daylight within the hour, and if both of our plans miscarry, what then? Would you mind if you never saw me again?" "No, of course you would not care." "I have not said so. You hardly understand. Women think differently to men. They travel separate paths. That's why I have no liking for them. They make trouble and confusion. It was pleasure enough to take you to Launceston, Mary, but when it comes to life and death, like my business now, God knows I wish you 100 miles away, or sitting primly, your sewing in your lap, in a trim parlor somewhere where you belong to be. That's never been my life, nor ever will." "Why not? You'll wed a farmer one day, or a small tradesman, and live respectably among your neighbors. Don't tell them you lived once at Jamaica Inn and had love made to you by a horse thief. They'd shut their doors against you. Good-bye, and here's prosperity to you." He rose from the bed and went towards the window, climbing through the gap he had broken in the pane, and swinging his legs over the porch with one hand on the blanket, he lowered himself to the ground. She watched him from the window, instinctively waving him farewell, but he had turned and gone without looking back at her, slipping across the yard like a shadow. Slowly she pulled up the blanket and replaced it on the bed. Morning would soon be here, and she would not sleep again. She sat on the bed, waiting until her door should be unlocked, and she made her plans for the evening to come. She must not draw suspicion upon herself during the long day. She must act passively, sullenly perhaps, as though feeling had last been stifled in her, and she was prepared to undertake the proposed journey with the landlord and Aunt Patience. Then later she would make some excuse, fatigue perhaps, a desire to rest in her room before the strain of the night journey. And then would come the most dangerous moment of her day. She would have to leave Jamaica Inn secretly and unobserved, and run like a hare to Altrincham. This time Francis Davy would understand. Time would be against them, and he must act accordingly. She would then return to the inn with his approval, and trust that her absence had remained unnoticed. This was the gamble. If the landlord went to her room and found her gone, her life would be worth nothing. She must be prepared for that. No excuse would save her then, but if he believed her to be sleeping still, then the game would continue. They would make preparations for the journey. They might even climb into the cart and come out upon the road. After that her responsibility would end. Their fate would be in the hands of Vicar of Altrincham. Beyond this she could not think, nor had she any desire to look ahead. So Mary waited for the day, and when it came, the long hours stretched interminably before her. Every minute was an hour, and an hour a particle of eternity itself. The atmosphere of strain was apparent among them all. In silence, haggardly, they waited for the night. Little progress could be made during the light of day. Intrusion was always possible. Aunt Patience wandered in the kitchen to her room, her footsteps pattering incessantly in the passage and on the stairs, and she made helpless and ineffectual preparations. She made the bundles and what poor clothes remained to her, and then undo them again, and the memory of some forgotten garment jogged her wandering mind. She pottered in the kitchen aimlessly, opening the cupboards, looking into drawers, and she fingered the pots and pans with restless fingers, incapable of deciding which to take and which to leave behind. Mary helped her as best she could, but the unreality of her task made it more difficult. She knew, while her aunt did not, that all this labor was in vain. Her heart misgave her at times, while she allowed her thoughts to dwell upon the future. How would Aunt Patience act? Would she look when they came to take her husband from her? How would she look when they came to take her husband from her? She was a child and must be tended as a child. Again she pattered from the kitchen, climbing the stairs to her room, and Mary would hear her drag her box on the floor, pace up and down, as she wrapped a single candlestick in a shawl and put it side by side with a cracked teapot and a faded muslin cap, only to unwrap them again and discard from the treasures more ancient. Giles Merlin would watch her moodily, cursing her in irritation now again as she dropped something on the floor or caught her foot and stumbled. His mood had changed again overnight. His watch in the kitchen had not improved his temper. And the very fact that the hours had been undisturbed and his visitor had not come upon him made him, if possible, more restless than before. He roamed about the house, nervy and abstracted, muttering to himself at times, peering from the windows as though he expected to see someone come upon him unawares. His nerves reacted upon his wife and Mary. Aunt Patience watched him anxiously, and she too turned her eyes to the window, and would listen, her mouth working, her hands twisting and untwisting her apron. No sound came from the peddler in the barred room, nor did the landlord go to him or mention him by name, and the silence was sinister in itself, strange and unnatural. Had the peddler shouted obscenities or thundered on the door, it would have been more in keeping with his character, but he lay there in the darkness without sound or movement, and for all the loathing of him, Mary shuddered at the possibility of his death. At the midday meal they sat round the table in the kitchen, eating silently, furtively almost, and the landlord, who usually had an appetite of an ox, drummed moodily with his fingers on the table, the cold meat on his plate untouched. Once Mary lifted her eyes and saw him staring at her beneath shaggy brows. The wild fear ran through her mind that he suspected her and had some knowledge of her plans. She had counted upon his high humor of the preceding night, and had been prepared to fall with it, if necessary, answer banter with banter, setting up no opposition to his will. He sat sullen, though, wrapped in gloom, and this mood was experienced before, and she knew now led to danger. At length she took courage in both hands, and asked him what time he intended to leave Jamaica Inn. When I am prepared, he told her shortly, and would say no more. She schooled herself to continue, though, and when she had helped to clear the meal away, and at her own suggestion, adding deceit upon deceit, had impressed upon her aunt the necessity of packing a basket of provisions against the journey, she turned to her uncle and spoke again. "If we are to travel tonight," she said, "would it not be better if Aunt Patience and myself rested now during the afternoon, so we could start afresh upon the journey? There will be no sleep for any of us tonight. Aunt Patience has been upon her feet since daybreak, and I too, for that matter. We do little good as far as we can see, waiting here for dusk to fall." She kept her voice as casual as possible, but the tight band across her heart was a sign that she waited his answer with misgiving, and she could not look into his eyes. He debated the matter for a moment, and to control her anxiety, she turned away and pretended to fumble in the cupboard. "You may rest if you will," he said at length. "There will be work for you both later. You're right when you say there will be no sleep for you tonight. Go, then. I shall be well rid of you in the time." For the first step had been achieved, and Mary lingered a while with her pretended work in the cupboard, fearing that haste to leave the kitchen should be judged suspicious. Her aunt, who acted always like a dummy to suggestion, followed her meekly upstairs when the time came, and padded along the further passage to her own room, as an obedient child would do. Mary entered her own little room above the porch, and closed the door, turning this key. Her heart beat fast at the prospect of adventure, and she could barely tell whether excitement or fear had the mastery. It was close on 4 miles to Altrincham by the road, and she could walk the distance in an hour. She left Jamaica Inn at 4 o'clock, and when the light was failing, she would be back again soon after 6, and the landlord would hardly come to rouse her before 7. She had 3 hours, then, in which to play her part, and she had already determined upon her method of departure. She would climb out onto the porch, and fall to the ground as Jem had done this morning. The drop was an easy one, and she would escape with little more than a scratch and a jar to her nerves. At any rate, it would be safer to do this than to risk coming upon her uncle in the passage below. The heavy entrance door would never open noiselessly, and to go through the bar would mean passing the open kitchen. She put on her warmest dress and fastened her old shawl across her shoulders with trembling hot hands. It was the enforced delay that irked her most. Once she was upon the road, the purpose of the walk would bring courage, and the very movement of her limbs would be stimulant. She sat by the window, looking out upon the bare yard of the high road where no one ever passed, waiting for the clock in the hall below to strike 4. When it sounded at last, the strokes rang out in silence like an alarm, pounding her nerves, and unlocking the door she listened for a moment, hearing footsteps echo the strokes and whispers in the air. It was imagination, of course, nothing moved. The clock ticked on into the next hour. Every second was precious to her now, and she must waste no time to be gone. She shut the door, locking it again, and went to the window. She crawled through the gap as Jim had done, her hands on the sill, and in a moment she was astride the porch, looking down upon the ground. The distance seemed greater, now that she crouched above it, and she had no blanket to control her fall and let her swing as he had done. The tiles of the porch were slippery and gave no grip to her hands and feet. She turned, clinging desperately to the security of the window-sill, and that seemed desirable suddenly, and a thing well known, and she shut her eyes and launched herself into the air. Her feet found the ground almost immediately. The jump was nothing as she had already foreseen, but the tiles had grazed her hands and arms and brought back to her again a vivid memory of her last fall from the carriage in the gully way beside the shore. She looked up at Jamaica Inn, sinister and gray in the approaching dusk, and the windows barred. She thought of the horrors of the house had witnessed, the secrets now embedded in its walls, side by side with the other memories of feasting and firelight and laughter before her uncle cast his shadow upon it. She turned away from it, as one turns instinctively from a house of the dead, and went up onto the road. The evening was fine, that at least favored her, and she strode out towards her destination with her eyes fixed upon the long white road that lay ahead. Dusk came as she walked, bringing shadows across the moors that lay on either side of her. Away to the left, the high tors, shrouded at first in mist, were gathered into the darkness. It was very still. There was no wind. Later there would be a moon. She wondered if her uncle had reckoned with the force of nature who would shine upon his plans. For herself it would not matter. Tonight she had no fear of the moors. They did not concern her. Her business was with the road. The moors lost their significance when unnoticed and untrodden. They loomed beyond her and away from her. She came at length to the 5 lanes, where the roads branched, and she turned to her left on the steep hill of Alternoon. Excitement rose high within her now as she passed the twinkling cottage lights and smelt the friendly smoke of the chimneys. Here were neighborly sounds that had long been lost to her, the barking of a dog, the rustle of trees, the clank of a pail as a man drew water from a well. There were open doors and voices from within. Chickens clucked beyond a hedge, and a woman called shrilly to a child, who answered with a cry. A cart lumbered past her into the shadows, and the driver gave her good evening. Here was a drowsy movement, a placidity and a peace. Here were all the old village smells she knew and understood. She passed them by, and she went to the vicarage beside the church. There were no lights here. The house was shrouded and silent. The trees closed in upon it, and once again she was vividly aware of her first impression that this was a house that lived in its own past and slept now with no knowledge of the present. She hammered upon the door and heard the blows echo through the empty house. She looked in through the windows, and her eyes met nothing but soft and negative darkness. Then, cursing her stupidity, she turned back again towards the church. Frances Davy would be there, of course. It was Sunday. She hesitated a moment, uncertain of her movements. Then the gate opened, and a woman came out into the road, carrying flowers. She stared hard at Mary, knowing her a stranger, and would have passed her by with a good night had not Mary turned and followed her. "Forgive me," she said. "I see you've come from the church. Can you tell if Mr. Davy himself is there?" "No, he is not," said the woman, and then after a moment, "Were you wishing to see him?" "Very urgently," said Mary. "I have been to his house, and I can get no answer. Can you help me?" The woman looked at her curiously and then shook her head. "I am sorry," she said. "The vicar is from home. He went away today to preach at another parish many miles from here. He is not expected back in Alternoon tonight." 14. At first Mary stared at the woman in disbelief. "Away from home," she repeated. "But that is impossible. Surely you are mistaken." Her confidence had been such that she rejected instinctively this sudden and fatal blow to her plans. The woman looked offended. She saw no reason why the stranger should doubt her word. "The vicar left Alternoon yesterday afternoon," she said. "He rode away after dinner. I ought to know, for I keep house for him." She must have seen something of the agony of disappointment in Mary's face, for she relented and spoke with kindness. "If there is any message you would like me to give him when he does return," she began, and Mary shook her head hopelessly, spirit and courage gone from her in a moment with the news. It will be too late, she said in despair. This is a matter of life and death. With Mr. Davy gone, I don't know where I can turn. Once more a gleam of curiosity came into the woman's eyes. Has someone been taken sick? She inquired. I could point you out where a doctor lives, if that would help you. Where have you come from tonight? Mary did not answer. She was thinking desperately of some way out of the situation. To come to Alternate and then return again without help to Jamaica Inn was impossible. She could not place confidence in the village people, nor would they believe her tale. She must find someone in the authority, someone who knew something of Joss Merlin and Jamaica Inn. Who is the nearest magistrate? She said at length. The woman puckered her brow and considered the question. There's no one close by us here in Alternoon, she said doubtfully. Why, the nearest would be Squire Bassat, over the North Hill. That must be over 4 miles from here, maybe more, maybe less. I cannot say for certain, for I've never been there. You surely would not walk out there tonight? I must, said Mary. There is nothing else for me to do. I must lose no time either. Forgive me for being so mysterious, but I am in great trouble, and only our vicar or a magistrate can help me. Can you tell me if the road to North Hill is hard to find? No, that's easy enough. You got 2 miles along the Launceston Road, and then turn right by the turnpike. But it's scarcely a walk for a maid like you after nightfall, and I'd never go myself. There's rough folk on the moors sometimes. You cannot trust them. We dare not venture from our homes these days, with robbery on the high road even, and violence too. Thank you for your sympathy. I'm very grateful to you, said Mary. But I have lived all my life in lonely places, and I'm not afraid. You must please yourself, answered the woman. But you'd best stay here and wait for the vicar if you can. That's impossible, said Mary. But when he does return, could you tell him perhaps that... Wait, though. If you have a pen and paper, I'll write him a note of explanation. That would be better still. Come into my cottage here, and you may write what you will. When you have gone, I can take the note to his house at once, and leave it on his table, where he will see it as soon as he comes home. Mary followed the woman to the cottage, and waited impatiently while she searched for kitchen for a pen. The time was slipping away fast. An added journey to North Hill had upset every former calculation. She could hardly return to Jamaica Inn once she had seen Mr. Bassat, and still hope her absence had remained unnoticed. Her uncle would take warning from her flight, and leave the inn before the intended time, in which case her mission would have been in vain. Now the woman returned with paper and quill, and Mary wrote desperately, never pausing to choose her words. I came here to ask your help, and you are gone, she scribbled. By now you will have heard with horror, as everyone in the country must have done, of the wreck upon the coast of Christmas Eve. It was my uncle's doing, he and the company from Jamaica Inn, that you will have guessed already. He knows that suspicion will fall upon him before long, and because of this he plans to leave the inn tonight and cross the Tamar into Devon. Finding you're absent, I go now with all possible haste to Mr. Bassat at North Hill, to tell everything to him and warn him of the escape, so that he can send at once to Jamaica Inn to seize my uncle before it's too late. I am giving this note to your housekeeper, who will I trust lay it with your eyes to fall upon it directly in your return. In haste, then, Mary Ellen. This she folded and gave to the woman by her side, thanking her, and assuring her that she had no fear of the road, and so set out again upon a walk of 4 miles or more to North Hill. She climbed the hill from Alternoon with a heavy heart and a wretched sense of isolation. She placed such faith in Francis Davy that it was hard to realize, even yet, that by his absence he had failed her. He had not known, of course, that she needed him, and even if he had, perhaps his plans would have come before her troubles. It is disheartening, and better to leave the lights of Alternoon behind her, and nothing as yet accomplished. At this moment, perhaps, her uncle was thundering upon her bedroom door, calling her to answer. He would wait a moment and then force the door. He might find her gone, and smash the window and tell him the manner of her going. Whether this would play havoc with his plans was a matter of conjecture. She could not know. Aunt Patience was her concern, and the thought of setting out upon the journey with like a shivering dog tethered to its master made Mary run along the bare white road with fists clenched and chin thrust into the air. She came at last to the turnpike, and turned down the narrow twisting lane, as the woman in Alternoon had told her. High hedges screened the country on either side, and the dark moor was thrust away and hidden from her eyes. The road twisted and turned, as the lanes in Helford used to do, and this change of scene, coming so suddenly after the bleak high road, put faith in her once more. She cheered herself by painting a picture of the Bassat family as kindly and courteous, like the Vivians at Trellewarren, who would listen to her with sympathy and understanding. She had not seen the squire at his best before. he had come upon Jamaica Inn in high ill humour, and that she thought now with regret of the part she had played in his deception. As for his lady, she must now know that a horse thief had made a fool of her in Launceston Market Square, and it was lucky for Mary that she had not stood at Jim's side when the pony was sold back to his rightful owner. She continued with her fantasy of the Basotts, but little incidents came back to her in spite of it, and at the bottom of her heart she looked upon the approaching interview with trepidation. The contour of the land had changed again, and the hills rose away from her, frosted and dark, and somewhere beyond her ran a stream, stinging and breaking over the stones. The moorland was no more. The moon came now, topping the further trees, and she walked in confidence, the light blazing a path for her, leading her downwards to the valley, where the trees closed in friendliness upon her. She came at last to lodge gates and entrance to a drive, while beyond her the lane continued to a village. That must be North Hill, and this the manor house belonging to the squire. She went down the avenue to the house, and away in the distance a church clock struck 7. She had been about 3 hours already from Jamaica Inn. Her nervousness returned as she rounded upon the house, large and forbidding in that distress, forbidding in the darkness, with the moon not yet risen high enough to shine kindly upon it. She swung the great bell, and the sound was met at once by the furious baying of hounds. She waited, and presently she heard footsteps from within, and the door was opened by a manservant. He called sharply at the dogs, who thrust their noses at the door and sniffed at Mary's feet. She felt inferior and small, and was conscious of her old dress and shawl before this man who waited for her to speak. "I have come to see Mr. Basott on very urgent business," she told him. "He would not know of my name, but if he could speak to me for a few minutes, I would explain. The matter is of desperate importance, otherwise I would not disturb him at such an hour, and on a Sunday night." "Mr. Basott left for Launceston this morning," answered the man. "He was called away hurriedly, and is not yet returned." This time Mary could not control herself, and a cry of despair escaped her. "I have come some way," she said, in an agony of feeling, as though by her very distress she could bring the squire to her side. "If I do not see him within the hour, something terrible will happen, and a great criminal escape the hands of the law. You look at me blankly, but I am speaking the truth. If only there was someone I could turn to." "Miss Basott is at home," said the man, stung with curiosity. "Perhaps she will see you if your business is as urgent as you say. Follow me, will you, to the library? Never mind the dogs, they will not hurt you." Mary crossed the hall in a dream, knowing only that her plan had failed again, through chance alone, and that she was powerless now to help herself. The wide library, with its blazing fire, seemed unreal to her, and accustomed as she was to the darkness, she blinked at the flood of light that met her eyes. A woman whom she recognized immediately as the fine lady from Launceston Market Square was sitting in a chair before the fire, reading aloud to 2 children, and she looked up in surprise when Mary had shown into the room. The servant began his explanation in some excitement. "This young woman has very grave news for the squire, madame," he said. "I thought it best to show her in to you directly." Miss Basott rose to her feet at once, dropping the book from her lap. "Isn't it one of those horses, It isn't one of the horses, is it?" she said. "Richards told me Solomon had been coughing and the diamond would not take his food. With this undergroom anything may happen." Mary shook her head. "Your household is not in trouble," she said gravely. "I bring news of another kind." "If I could speak to you alone," Miss Basott answered, relieved that her horses were not affected, and she spoke quickly to her children, who ran from the room, followed by the manservant. "What can I do for you?" she said graciously. "You look pale and fatigued. Won't you sit down?" Mary shook her head impatiently. "Thank you, but I must know when Mr. Basott is returning home." "I have no idea," replied his lady. "He was obliged to leave this morning at a moment's notice, and to tell you the truth, I am seriously concerned about him. If this dreadful innkeeper shows a fight, as he is certain to do, Mr. Basott may be wounded in spite of his soldiers." "What do you mean?" said Mary swiftly. "Why, the squire has set out upon a highly dangerous mission. Your face is new to me, and I conclude you are not from North Hill. Otherwise you would have heard of this man Marilyn, who keeps an inn upon Bodmin Road. His squire suspected him for some while of terrible crimes, but it was not until this morning that the full proof came into his hands. He departed at once for Launceston to summon help, and from what he told me before he went, he intends to surround the inn tonight and seize the inhabitants. He will go well armed, of course, and with a large body of men, but I shall not rest until he returns." Something in Mary's face must have warned her, for she turned very pale. and backed towards the fire, reaching out for the heavy bell pull that hung on the wall. "You are the girl he spoke about," she said quickly. "The girl from the inn, the niece of the landlord. Stay where you are, don't move, or I will summon my servants. You are the girl. I know it. He described you to me. What do you want with me?" Mary put out her hand. Her face was as white as the woman's by the fire. "I won't hurt you," she said. "Please do not ring. Let me explain. Yes, I am the girl from Jamaica Inn." Miss Bassett did not trust her. She watched Mary with troubled eyes, and kept her hand upon the bell rope. "I have no money here," she said. "I can do nothing for you. If you have come to North Hill to plead for your uncle, it is too late." "You misunderstand me," said Mary quietly, "and the landlord of Jamaica Inn is a relative to me by marriage only. Why I have been living there does not matter now, and the story would take too long with the telling. I fear and detest him more than you or anyone in the country, and with reason. I came here to warn Mr. Bassett that the landlord intended to leave the inn tonight and to escape justice. I have definite proof of his guilt, which I did not believe Mr. Bassett to possess. You tell me that he is already gone, and perhaps even now it is at Jamaica Inn." Miss Bassett did not trust. Oh, sorry. "Therefore I wasted my time in coming here." She sat down again. Her hands in her lap, and stared blankly at the fire. She had come to the end of her resources, and for the moment she could not look ahead. All that her weary mind could tell her was that the labor of the evening had been purposeless and in vain. She need never have left her bedroom at Jamaica Inn. Mr. Bassett would have come in any case, and by now, by her secret meddling, she had blundered into the very mistake she had wished to avoid. She had stayed away too long, and by now her uncle would have guessed the truth, and in all probability made his escape. Squire Bassett and his men would ride to a deserted inn. She lifted her eyes once more to the lady of the house. "I have done a very senseless thing in coming here," she said hopelessly. "I thought it was clever, and I have only succeeded in making a fool of myself and of everyone else. My uncle will discover my room is empty, and guess at once that I have betrayed him. He will leave Jamaica Inn before Mr. Bassett arrives." The squire's lady let go of the bell rope now, and came towards her. "You speak sincerely, and you have an honest face," she said kindly. "I am sorry if I misjudged you at first, but Jamaica Inn is a terrible name, and I believe anyone would have done the same had they been confronted suddenly with the landlord's niece. You have been placed in a fearful position, and I think you very brave to come here tonight, all those lonely miles, to warn my husband. I should have gone mad with fear. The question is this: what would you have me do now? I am willing to help you in any way you think best." "There is nothing we can do," said Mary, shaking her head. "I must wait here, I suppose, until Mr. Bassett returns. He won't be over pleased to see me when he hears how I have blundered. God knows I deserve every reproach." "I will speak for you," replied Miss Bassett. "You could not possibly know my husband had already been informed, and I will soon smooth him down if he needs it. Be thankful you are here with safety. And meanwhile—" "How did the squire learn the truth so suddenly?" asked Mary. "I have not the slightest idea. He was sent for very suddenly this morning, as I have told you already, and he only gave me the barest details before his horse was saddled and he was gone. Now won't you rest yourself and forget for the time the whole hateful business? You are probably famished for want of food." Once more she approached the fireplace, and this time she pulled the bell rope 3 or 4 times. For all her worry and distress, Mary could not help seeing the irony of the situation. Here was the lady of the house offering hospitality, who a moment ago had threatened her with seizure by the same servants who would now bring her food. She thought also of the scene in the market square, and the same lady, in velvet cloak and feathered hat, had paid a high price for her own pony, and she wondered whether the trickery had been discovered. If Mary's own part in the deception should come to light, Miss Bassett would hardly be so lavish with her hospitality. Meanwhile the servant appeared, his inquisitive nose in the air, and was told by his mistress to bring a tray of supper for Mary and the dogs who had followed him into the room came now to make friends with the stranger, wagging their tails and pushing their soft noses into her hands. Accepting her as a member of the household, her presence in the manor house at North Hill was still without reality, and though Mary tried, she could not throw aside anxiety and relax. She felt as though she had no right to be sitting there before the glowing fire, when outside in darkness. Life and death fought hand to hand before Jamaica Inn. She ate mechanically, forcing herself to swallow the food she needed, aware of the prattle of her hostess at her side, who in the mistaken kindness of her heart believed that incessant conversation about nothing at all was the only method of alleviating worry. The chatter had she but realized, increased it, and when Mary had finished her supper and ate and sat once more with her hands on her lap, staring at the fire, Miss Besot, searching in her mind for suitable distraction, fetched an album of her own water-colors and proceeded to turn the pages for the benefit of her guest. When the clock on the mantelpiece chimed 8 o'clock in the piercing tones, Mary could bear it no longer. This dragging inactivity was worse than danger and pursuit. "Forgive me," she said, rising to her feet. "You have been so kind, and I can never thank you enough, but I am anxious, desperately anxious, and I can think of nothing but my poor aunt, who at this moment may be suffering the tortures of hell. I must know what is happening at Jamaica Inn, if I walk back there myself tonight." Miss Besot dropped to her album in a flutter of distress. "Of course you are anxious. I have seen it all along and tried to take your mind off of it. How terrible it is! I am as concerned as you are for my husband's sake, but you cannot possibly walk back there now alone. Why, it would be after midnight before you arrived, and heaven knows what might not happen to you on the way. I will order the trap, and Richards will go with you. He is most trustworthy and dependable, and can be armed in case of need. If there is fighting in progress, you would see it from the bottom of the hill, and he would not approach until it was over. I would come with you myself, but my health is delicate at the moment, and of course you will do nothing of the kind," said Mary swiftly. "I am used to danger and the road by night, and you are not. I shall be putting you to very great trouble if harnessing your horse at this hour and rousing your groom. I assure you I am no longer tired, and I can walk." But Miss Besot had already pulled the bell. "Have word sent to Richards to bring the trap around immediately," she said to the astonished servant. "I will give him further orders when he arrives. Tell him there must be a little delay as possible." Then she fitted Mary with a heavy cloak and hood, thick rug, and foot warmer, protesting all the while that only her state of health prevented her from making the journey too, for which Mary was utterly thankful, Miss Besot being hardly the ideal companion for so improvident and dangerous an escapade. In a quarter of an hour the trap drove up the door, with Richards in charge. Mary recognized him at once, the servant who had ridden with Mr. Besot originally to Jamaica Inn. His reluctance at leaving his fireside on a Sunday night was soon overcome when he learned his mission, and with 2 large pistols stuck in his belt and orders to fire at anyone who got into the trap, he assumed at once an air of truculence and authority hitherto unknown to him. Mary climbed in beside him, the dogs baying a chorus of farewell, and it was only when the drive twisted and the house was out of sight that Mary realized she had set out on what was probably to be a foolhardy and dangerous expedition. Anything might have happened during the 5 hours she had been absent from Jamaica Inn, and even with the trap she scarcely hoped to arrive there before 10:30. She could make no plans, and her action depended on the moment when it came. With the moon now high in the sky and the soft air blowing upon her, she felt emboldened to face disaster when it came, and this ride to the scene of action, however dangerous, was better than sitting like a helpless child listening to the prattle of Miss Besot. The man Richards was armed, and she herself would use a gun if necessary. He was burning with curiosity, of course, but she gave short answers to his questions, and did not encourage him. The drive was silent, then, for the most part, with no other sound but the steady clopping of the horses' hoofs upon the road, and now and again the owl hooted from the sills of trees. The rustle of hedgerow and the creeping country whispers were left behind when the trap came out upon the Bodmin road, and once again the dark moor stretched out on either side, lapping the road like a desert. The ribbon of the highway shone white under the moon. It wound and was not. It wound and was lost in the fold of the further hill, bare and untrodden. There were no travellers but themselves upon the road tonight. On Christmas Eve, when Mary had ridden there, the wind had lashed venomously at the carriage wheels, and the rain hammered the windows. Now the air was cold and strangely still, and the moor itself lay placid and softened and smoothed the light that bathed them. Theirs was a peaceful mood, and the old god slept undisturbed. Briskly the horse and trap covered the weary miles that Mary had walked home. She recognized each bend in the road now, and how at times the moor encroached upon it with high tufts of grass or twisted stem of broom. There, beyond her in the valley, would be the lights of Alternoon, and already the 5 lanes branched out from the road like fingers from a hand. The wild stretch to Jamaica lay before them. Even when the night was still, the wind played here, bare and open as it was to every compass point, and tonight it hummed from Rufter in the west, keen as a knife and cold, gathering the marsh smells as it came over the bitter turf and the running streams. There was still no sign of man or beast upon the road, which rose and dipped again across the moor, and though Mary strained her eyes and ears, she could hear nothing. On such a night the slightest sound would be magnified, and the approach of Mr. Bassat's party, numbering as they would 12 men or so, said Richards, would easily be heard 2 miles or more away. We shall find them there before us, as likely as not, he told Mary, and the landlord, with his hands bound, breathing fire at the squire. It will be a good thing for the neighborhood when he's put out of harm's way, and he would have been before now if the squire could have had his way. It's a pity we were not here sooner. There'll have been some sport in taking him, I reckon. Little sport if Mr. Bassat finds that his bird is flown, said Mary quietly. Joss Merlin knows these moors like the back of his hand, and he'll not linger once he has the start of an hour, or less than that. My master was bred here, same as the landlord, said Richards. If it comes to a chase across the country, I'd lay odds the squire every time. He's hunted here, man and boy, for nearly 50 years, I should say. Where a fox will go, the squire will follow. But they'll catch just one before he starts to run, if I'm not mistaken. Mary let him continue. His occasional jerky statements did not worry her, as the kindly prattle of his mistress had done, and his broad back and honest rugged face gave her some confidence in this night of strain. They were approaching the dip in the road, the narrow bridge that spanned the river Fowey. Mary could hear the ripple and pay of the stream as it ran swiftly over the stones. The steep hill to Jamaica rose in front of them, white beneath the moon, and as the dark chimneys appeared above the crest, Richards fell silent, fumbling with the pistols in his belt, and he cleared his throat with a little nervous jerk of his head. Mary's heart beat fast now, and she held tight to the side of the trap. The horse bent to the climb, his head low, and it seemed to Mary that the clop of his hoofs rang too loudly on the surface of the road, and she wished they had been more silent. As they drew near to the summit of the hill, Richards turned and whispered in her ear, "Wouldn't it be best for you to wait here in the trap by the side of the road, and I go forward and see if they are there?" Mary shook her head. "Better for me to go," she said, "and you follow a pace or 2 behind, or stay here till I call." From the silence, it seems as though the squire and his party are not yet come after all, and that the landlord has escaped. Should he be there, however, my uncle, I can risk an encounter with him, when you could not. Give me a pistol, I shall have little to fear of him then. "I hardly think it right for you to go alone," said the man doubtfully. "You may walk right into him, and I hear no sound from you again. It's strange, as you say, this silence. I'd expect shouting and fighting, and my master's voice topping it all. It's almost unnatural in a way. They must have been detained in Launceston. I half fancy there'd be more wisdom if we turned aside down that track there, and waited for them to come." "I've waited long enough tonight, and gone half mad with it," said Mary. "I'd rather come upon my uncle face to face than lie here in the ditch, seeing and hearing nothing. It's my aunt I'm thinking of. She's as innocent as a child in all this business, and I want to care for her if I can. Give me a pistol and let me go. I can tread like a cat, and I'll not run my head into a noose, I promise you. She threw off the heavy cloak and hood that protected her from the cold night air and seized hold of the pistol that handed her to her reluctantly. "Don't follow me unless I call or give some signal," she said. "Should you hear a shot fired, then perhaps it would be as well to come after me, but come warily for all that. There's no need for both of us to run like fools into danger. For my part, I believe my uncle to have gone." She hoped now that he had, and by driving into Devon made an end to the whole business. The country would be rid of him, and the cheapest possible way. He might even, as he had said, start life again, or more likely still, dig himself in somewhere 500 miles from Cornwall, and drink himself to death. She had no interest now in this capture. She wanted it finished and thrust aside. She wanted above all to lead her own life and forget him, and to put the world between her and Jamaica Inn. Revenge was an empty thing. To see him bound and helpless, surrounded by the squire and his men, would be of little satisfaction. She had spoken to Richards with confidence, but for all that she dreaded an encounter with her uncle, armed as she was, at the thought of coming upon him suddenly in the passage of the inn, with his hands ready to strike and his bloodshot eyes staring down upon her, made her pause in her stride before the yard and glance back in the dark shadow of the ditch was Richards and his trap. Then she levered her pistol, her finger upon the trigger, and looked round the corner of the stone wall to the yard. It was empty. The stable door was shut. The inn was dark and silent as when she had left it nearly 7 hours before, and the windows and the door were barred. She looked up to her window, and the pane of glass gasped empty and wide, unchanged since she had climbed from it that afternoon. There were no wheel marks in the yard, no preparations for departure. She crept across to the stable and laid her ear against the door. She waited a moment, and then she heard the pony move restlessly in his stall. She heard his hoofs click in the cobbles. Then they had not gone, and her uncle was still at Jamaica Inn. Her heart sank, and she wondered if she could return to Richards in the trap and wait, as he had suggested, until Squire Bassett and his men arrived. She glanced once more at the shuttered house. Surely, if her uncle intended to leave, he would have gone before now. The cart alone would take an hour to load, and it must be nearly 11 o'clock. He might have altered his plans and decided to go on foot, but then Aunt Patience would never accompany him. Mary hesitated. The situation had become odd now and unreal. She stood by the porch and listened. She even tried the handle of the door. It was locked, of course. She ventured a little way round the corner of the house, past the entrance to the bar, and so to the patch of garden behind the kitchen. She trod softly now, keeping herself in shadow, and she came to where a chink of candlelight would show through the gap in the kitchen shutter. There was no light. She stepped close now to the shutter, and laid her eye against the slit. The kitchen was as black as pit. She laid her hand on the knob of the door, and slowly turned it. It gave, to her astonishment, and the door opened. This easy entrance, entirely unforeseen, shocked her for the moment, and she was afraid to enter. Supposing her uncle sat on his chair, waiting for her, his gun across his knee. She had her own pistol, but it gave her no confidence. Very slowly she laid her face upon the gap made by the door. No sound came to her. Out of the tail of her eye she could see the ashes of the fire. The glow was almost gone. She knew that nobody was there. Some instinct told her that the kitchen had been empty for hours. She pushed the door wide and went inside. The room struck cold and damp. She waited until her eyes had become accustomed to the darkness, and she could make out the shape of the kitchen table and the chair beside it. There was a candle on the table, and she thrust it into the feeble glow of the fire, where it took light and flickered. When it burned strong enough, she held it high above her head and looked around her. The kitchen was still strewn with preparations for departure. There was a bundle belonging to Aunt Patience on the chair, and a heap of blankets lay on the floor ready to be rolled. In the corner of the room where it always stood was her uncle's gun. They had decided then to wait for another day, and were now abed asleep in the room upstairs. The door to the passage was wide open, and the silence became more oppressive than before, strangely and horribly still. Something was not as it had been. Some sound was lacking that must account for the silence. Then Mary realized that she could not hear the clock. The ticking had stopped. She stepped onto the passage and listened again. She was right. The house was silent because the clock had stopped. She went forward slowly, and the candle in one hand, the pistol levered in the other. She turned the corner of the long, dark passage, branched into the hall, and she saw that the clock, which now stood always against the wall beside the door into the parlor, had toppled forward and fallen upon its face. The glass was splintered in fragments on the stone flags. The wood was split. The wall gaped bare where it stood, very naked now and strange, with the paper marked deep yellow in contrast to the faded pattern of the wall. The clock had fallen across the narrow hall, and it was not until she came to the foot of the stairs that Mary saw what was beyond. The landlord of Jamaica Inn lay on his face among the wreckage. The fallen clock had hidden him at first, for he sprawled in the shadow, one arm flung high above his head and the other fastened upon the broken splintered door, because his legs were stretched out on either side of him, one foot jamming the wainscoting. He looked even larger than death and it had did before, his great frame blocking the entrance from wall to wall. There was blood on the stone floor, and blood between his shoulders, dark now and nearly dry where the knife had found him. When he was stabbed from behind, he must have stretched out his hands and stumbled, dragging at the clock, and when he fell upon his face, the clock crashed with him to the ground, and he died there, clutching at the door. "15. It was a long while before Mary moved away from the stairs. Something of her own strength had ebbed away, leaving her powerless like the figure on the floor. Her eyes dwelt upon little immaterial things, the fragments of glass from the smashed clock face. There were blood-stained, too, in the discolored patch of the wall where the clock had stood. A spider settled on her uncle's hand, and it seemed strange to her that the hand stayed motionless and did not seek to rid itself of the spider. Her uncle would have shaken it free. Then it crawled from his hand and ran up his arm, working its way beyond the shoulder. When it came to the wound, it hesitated, then made a circuit. Returning to it again in curiosity, there was a lack of fear in its rapidity. It was somehow horrible and desecrating to death. The spider knew that the landlord could not harm him. Mary knew this too, but she had not lost her fear, like the spider. It was the silence that frightened her most, now that the clock no longer ticked. Her nerves strained for the sound of it. The slow, wheezing choke had been familiar and a symbol of normality. The light of her candle played upon the walls, but it did not reach the top of the stairs, where the darkness gaped at her like a gulf. She knew she could never climb those stairs again, nor tread that empty landing. Whatever lay beyond her and above must rest there undisturbed. Death had come upon the house tonight, and its brooding spirit still hovered in the air. She felt now that this was what Jamaica Inn had always waited for and feared. The damp walls, the creaking boards, the whispers in the air, and the footsteps that had no name, these were the warning of a house that had felt itself long threatened. Mary shivered, and she knew that the quality of this silence had origin in far-off, buried and forgotten things. She dreaded panic above all things, the scream that forced itself to the lips, the wild stumble of groping feet and hands that beat the air for passage. She was afraid that it might come to her, destroying reason, and now, for the first shock of discovery had lessened, she knew that it might force its way upon her, close in and stifle her. Her fingers might lose their sense of grit and touch, and the candle fall from her hands, and she'd be alone and covered by the darkness. The tearing desire to run seized hold of her, and she conquered it. She backed away from the hall towards the passage, the candle flickering in the draught of air, and when she came to the kitchen she saw the door still open to the patch of garden. Her calm deserted her, and she ran blindly through the door to the cold free air outside. A sob in her throat and her outstretched hands grazing the stone wall, she turned the corner of the house. She ran like a thing pursued across the yard and came to the open road, where the familiar stalwart figure of the squire's groom confronted her. He put out his hands to save her, and as she groped at his belt, feeling for security, her teeth chattering now in full shock of reaction. "He's dead," she said. "He's dead there on the floor. I saw him." And try as she did, she could not stop this chattering of her teeth and the shivering of her body. He led her to the side of the road, back to the trap, and he reached for the cloak and put it around her, and she held it to her close, grateful for the warmth. "He's dead," she repeated. Stabbed in the back. I saw the place where his coat was rent, and there was blood. He lay on his face. The clock had fallen with him. The blood was dry, and he looked as though he had lain there for some time. The inn was dark and silent. No one else was there. Was your aunt gone? Whispered the man. Mary shook her head. I don't know. I did not see her. I had to come away. He saw by her face that the strength had gone, and she would fall, and he helped her up into the trap and climbed onto the seat beside her. All right, then, he said. All right, sit quiet then here. No one shall hurt you. There now, all right then. His gruff voice helped her, and she crouched beside him into the trap. The warm cloak muffled her to the chin. That was no sight for a maid to see, he told her. You should have let me go. I wish now you'd have stayed back here in the trap. It's terrible for you to see him lying dead there, murdered. Talking eased her, and his rough sympathy was good. The pony was still in the stable, she said. I listened at the door and heard him move. They had never finished their preparations for going. The kitchen door was unlocked, and there were bundles on the floor there, and blankets too, ready to load into the cart. It must have happened several hours ago. It puzzles me that the squire's doing, said Richards. He should have been here before this. I'd feel easier if he'd come, and you could tell your story to him. There's been bad work here tonight. You should never have come. They fell silent. Both of them watched the road for the coming of the squire. Who'd have killed the landlord? Said Richards, puzzled. He's a match for most men and should have held his own. There was plenty who might have had a handle in it, though, for all that. If ever a man was hated, he was. There was a peddler, said Mary slowly. I'd forgotten the peddler. It must have been him, breaking out from the barred room. She fastened upon the idea to escape from another, and she retold the story, eagerly now, of how the peddler had come into the inn the night before. It seemed at once the crime was proven, and there could be no other explanation. He'll not run far before the squire catches him, said the groom. You could be sure of that. No one could hide on these moors unless he's a local man. I've never heard of Harry the peddler before, but they came from every hole and corner in Cornwall. Joss Merlin's men, and by all accounts, they're, as you might say, the dregs of the country. He paused, and then, I'll go to the inn if you would care for me to, and see for myself if he's left any trace behind him. There might be something. Mary seized hold of his arm. They'll not be alone again, she said swiftly. Think me a coward if you will, but I could not stand it. Had you been inside at Jamaica Inn, you would understand. There's a brooding quiet about the place tonight that cares nothing of the poor dead body lying there. I can mind the time before your uncle came there, when the house stood empty, said the servant, and we'd take the dogs in there after rats for sport. We thought nothing of it then. Just a lonely shell of a place, it seemed, without a soul of its own. But the squire kept it in good repair, mind you, while he waited for a tenant. I'm a St. Neot man myself, and never came here until I served the squire. But I've been told in the old days there was a good cheer and good company at Jamaica, with friendly, happy folk living in the house, and always a bed for passing traveller upon the road. The coaches stayed here then, and never do now, and houses would meet here once a week in Mr. Besot's boyhood. Maybe these things will come again. Mary shook her head. I've only seen the evil, she said. I've only seen the suffering there's been and the cruelty and the pain. When my uncle came to Jamaica Inn, he must have cast a shadow over the good things, and they died. Their voices had sunk to a whisper, and they glanced half-consciously over their shoulders to the tall chimneys that stood out against the sky, clear-cut and grey before the moon. They were both thinking of one thing, and neither had the courage to mention it first, the groom for delicacy and tact, Mary for fear alone. Then at last she spoke, her voice husky and low. Something has happened to my aunt as well. I know that. I know she's dead. That was why I was afraid to go upstairs. She's lying there in the darkness on the landing above. Whoever killed my uncle will have killed her too. The groom cleared his throat. She may have run out into the moor, he said. She may have run for help along the road. No, whispered Mary. She'd have never done that. She would be with him now, down in the hall there, crouching by his side. She's dead. I know she's dead. If I'd not left her, this would have never happened. The man was silent. He could not help her. After all, she was a stranger to him, and what had passed beneath the roof of the inn while she had lived there was no concern of his. The responsibility of the evening lay heavy upon his shoulders, and he wished that his master would come. Fighting and shouting, he understood. There was no sense in that, but if there had really been a murder, as she said, and the landlord lying dead there, and his wife too, why, they could do no good in staying there like fugitives themselves, crouching in the ditch, but were better off fire away, and so down the road to the sight and sound of human habitation. "I came here by the orders of my mistress," he began awkwardly. "But she said that the squire would be here, seeing as he's not." Mary held up a warning hand. "Listen," she said sharply. "Can you hear something?" They strained their ears to the north. The faint clop of horses was unmistakable, coming from beyond the valley over the brow of the further hill. "It's them," said Richards excitedly. "It's the squire. He's come at last. Watch now. We'll see them go down the road into the valley." They waited, and when a minute had passed and the first horseman appeared like a black smudge against the hard white road, followed by another and another, they strung out in a line and closed again, traveling at a gallop, while the cob who waited patiently beside the ditch pricked his ears and turned an inquiring head. The clatter drew near, and Richards in his relief ran up upon the road to greet them, shouting and waving his arms. The leader swerved, drew rein, calling out in surprise at the sight of the groom. "What the devil do you do here?" he shouted, for it was Squire himself, and he held up his hand to warn the followers behind. "The landlord is dead, murdered," cried the groom. "I have his niece here with me, in the trap. It was Miss Besot herself who sent me out here, sir. This young woman had her best to tell you the story in her own words." He held the horse while his master dismounted, answering as well as he could the rapid questions put to him by the squire, and the little band of men gathered around him too, pressing for news, some of them dismounting too, and stamping their feet on the ground, blowing upon their hands for warmth. "If the fellow has been murdered, as you say, then by God it serves him right," said Mr. Besot. "But I'd rather have clapped irons on him myself for all that. You can't pay scores against a dead man. Go into the yard, the rest of you, while I see if I can get some sense out of the girl yonder." Richards, relieved of responsibility, was surrounded at once and treated as something of a hero, who had not only discovered the murder, but had tackled the author of it single-handedly, until he reluctantly admitted that his part in the adventure had been small. The squire, whose mind had worked slowly, did not realize what Mary was doing in the trap, and considered her as his groom's prisoner. He heard with astonishment how she had walked the long miles to North Hill in the hopes of finding him, and, not content with that, must return again to Jamaica Inn. "This is altogether beyond me," he said gruffly. "I believed you to be in conspiracy with your uncle against the law." "Why did you lie to me, then, when I came here earlier in the month? You told me you knew nothing." "I lied because of my aunt," said Mary wearily. "Whatever I said to you then was for her sake only, nor did I know as much then as I do now. I am willing to explain everything in a court of law should it be necessary, but if I tried to tell you now, you would not understand, nor would I have the time to listen," replied the squire. "You did a brave thing in walking all that way to Alternan to warn me, and I shall remember it in your favor, but all this trouble could have been avoided, and the terrible crime of Christmas Eve prevented, had you been frank with me before. However, all that for later. My groom tells me that you have found your uncle murdered, but beyond that you know nothing of the crime. Had you been a man, you should go with me now to the inn, but I will spare you that. I can see you've endured enough." He raised his voice and shouted for the servant. "Take the trap up to the yard, and stay beside with the young woman while you break into the inn." And then turning to Mary, "I must ask you to wait in the yard, and if your courage permits you, you are the only one among us who knows anything of the matter, and you are the last to see your uncle alive." Mary nodded her head. She was nothing more now than a passive instrument of the law, and must do as she was bidden. He had at least spared her the ordeal of going once more into the empty inn, and looking upon the body of her uncle. The yard that had lain in shadow when she came, was now the scene of activity. Horses stamped the cobblestones, and there was the shaking, ringing sound of bit and bridle, and there were the footsteps and voices of the men, topped by the squire's gruff word of command. He led the way round the back at Mary's direction, and presently the bleak and silent house lost its shuttered air. The window in the bar was flung open, the windows in the parlor. Some of the men went upstairs and explored the empty guest rooms above, for these windows were unbarred also and opened to the air. Only the heavy entrance door remained shut, and Mary knew that the landlord's body lay stretched across the threshold. Someone called sharply from the house and was answered by a murmur of voices and a question from the squire. The sounds came plainly now through the open parlor window to the yard outside. Richard glanced across at Mary, and he saw by the pallor of her face that she had heard. A man who stood by the horses and who had not gone with the others inside the inn shouted to the groom. "Do you hear what they say?" he said in some excitement. "There's another body there on the landing upstairs." Richard said nothing. Mary drew her cloak further around her shoulders and pulled the hood across her face. They waited in silence. Presently the squire himself came out into the yard and crossed the trap. "I'm sorry," he said. "I have bad news for you. Perhaps you expected it." "Yes," said Mary. "I don't think she suffered at all. She must have died at once. She was lying just inside the bedroom at the end of the passage, stabbed like your uncle. She could have known nothing. Believe me, I'm very sorry. I wish I could have spared you this." He stood by her, awkward and distressed, and repeated again that she could not have suffered, that she had not known, but was killed instantly. But then, seeing that Mary was better off alone, and could not help her, he stamped back across the yard to the inn. Mary sat motionless, shrouded in her cloak, and she prayed in her own way that Aunt Patience would forgive her and find peace now, wherever she should be, and that the dragging chains of life would fall away from her, leaving her free. She prayed also that Aunt Patience would understand what she had tried to do, and above all that, her mother would be there, and she would not be alone. These were the only thoughts that brought her a measure of consolation. She knew that if she went over in her mind the story of the last few hours, she would come to the one and only accusation. Had she not left Jamaica Inn, Aunt Patience might not have died. Once again, though, there came a murmur of excitement from the house, and this time there was shouting, the sound of running feet, and several voices raised in unison, so that Richards ran to the open parlor window, forgetting his trust in the excitement of the moment, and thrust his leg over the sill. There was a crash of splintering wood, and the shutters were torn away from the window of the barred room, which no one, apparently, had entered up to now. The men were tearing away the barricaded wood, and someone held a flare to light the room. Mary could see the flame dance in the draught of air. Then the light vanished and the voices died away, and she could hear the sound of footsteps tramping the back of the house, and around the corner of the yard they came, 6 or 7 of them, led by the squire, holding among them something that squirmed and wriggled, and found for release the hoarse, bewildered cries. "They have got him! It's the murderer!" shouted Richards, calling to Mary, and she turned, brushing aside the hood that covered her face, and looked down upon the group of men who came to the trap. The captive stared up at her, blinking at the daylight. They flashed in his eyes, his clothes cobwebbed covered, his face unshaven and black. He was Harry the peddler. "Who is he?" they shouted. "Do you know him?" And the squire came round in front of the trap and bade them bring the man close, so that she could see him well. "What do you know of this fellow?" he said to Mary. "We found him in the barred room yonder, lying on some sacks, and he denies all knowledge of the crime." "He was of the company," said Mary slowly, "and he came to the inn last night and quarrelled with my uncle. My uncle had the better of him, and locked him up in the barred room, threatening him with death. He had every reason to kill my uncle, and no one could have done it but he. He is lying to you. But the door was locked upon him. It took 3 of us or more to break it down from the outside," said the squire. "This fellow had never been from the new room at all. Look at his clothes, look at his eyes, dazzled still by the light. He's not your murderer." The peddler glanced furtively from one to the other of his guards, his small, mean eyes darting to the right and left, and Mary knew at once what the squire said was no more than the truth. Harry the peddler could not have committed the crime. He had lain in the barred room since the landlord put him there, over 24 hours ago. He had lain there in the dark, waiting for release during the long hours someone had come to Jamaica Inn and gone again, his work completed in the silence of the light. "Whoever did it knew nothing of this rascal locked in the room yonder," continued the squire. "He's of no use to us as a witness, as far as I can see, for he heard and saw nothing. But we'll have him in jail for that, and hang him too if he deserves it, which I'll be bound he does. But he shall turn king's evidence first, and give us the names of his companions. One of them has killed the landlord for revenge, you may depend on that, and we'll track him down if we set every hound in Cornwall on his heels. Take his fellow to the stable, some of you, and hold him there. The rest can come back to the inn with me." They dragged the peddler away, who, realizing that some crime had been discovered, and suspicion might possibly rest upon him, found his tongue at last and began to blab his innocence, whining for mercy and swearing by the Trinity until someone cuffed him to silence and threatened him with a rope, there and then above the stable door. This silenced him, and he fell to muttering blasphemies beneath his breath, turning his rat's eyes now and again to Mary, who sat above him in the trap a few yards away. She waited there, her chin in her hands, and the hood fallen away from her face, and she neither heard his blasphemies nor saw his furtive narrow eyes, for she remembered other eyes that had looked upon her in the morning, and another voice that had spoken calm and cold, saying of his brother, "He shall die for this." There was a sentence flung carelessly on the way to Launceston Fair. "I have never killed a man yet," and there was the gypsy woman in the market square. "There's blood on your hand, you'll kill a man one day." And the little things she would forget rose up again and clamored against him, his hatred of his brother, his streak of callous cruelty, his lack of tenderness, his tainted Merlin blood. Though before all things he would betray him first. Like to like, one of a kind. He had gone to Jamaica Inn as he had promised, and his brother had died as he had sworn. The whole truth seared up in her ugliness and horror, and she wished now that she had stayed. And he had killed her too. He was a thief, and in the night he had come and was gone again. She knew that the evidence would be built against him piece by piece with herself as witness. It would be a fence around him from which there would be no escape. She had only now to go to the squire and say, "I know who it was who had done this thing," and they would listen to her. Of all of them, they had crowded round her like a pack of hounds panting for the chase, and the trail would lead to him, past Rushford, through Trewartha Marsh, to 12 men's more. He slept there now, perhaps, forgetful of his crime and caring not at all, stretched on his bed in the lonely cottage where he and his brother had been born. When morning came he'd be gone, whistling perhaps, throwing his legs across a horse, and so away and out of Cornwall forever, a murderer like his father before him. In her fancy she heard the clap of his horse upon the road, far distant in the quiet night, being a tempo of farewell. But fancy became reason, and reason became certainty, and the sound she heard was not the dream of her imagination, but the live tapping of a horse upon the highway. She turned her head and listened, nerves stung now to the limit, the hands that held the cloak around her were clammy and cold with sweat. The sound of the horse drew nearer still. He was trotting at a steady, even pace, neither hurried nor slow, and the rhythmic, jogging tune that he played on the road had echo in her throbbing heart. She was alone now, she listened. The men who guarded the peddler murmured to one another in low tones, and looked toward the road. And the groom Richards, who was with them, hesitated a moment, and then went swiftly to the inn to call the squire. The beat of the horse's hoofs rang loud now as he climbed the hill, sounding like a challenge to the night so silent and still as he topped the summit and rounded the wall into view of the squire came out of the inn, followed by this man. "Stop," he called, "in the name of the king, I must ask your business on the road tonight." The horseman drew rein and turned into the yard. The black riding cape gave no clue to his identity, but when he bowed and bared his head, the thick halo of hair shone white under the moon, and the voice that spoke and answered the squire was gentle and sweet. "Mr. Bassett of North Hill, I believe," he said, and he leaned forward in his saddle, with a note in his hand. "I have a message here from Mary Ellen of Jamaica Inn, who asks my help in trouble, but I see the company assembled here that I have come too late. You remember me, of course, we have met before. I am the Vicar of Altarnun." I feel like I need to actually stop here. There are 3 chapters left. I feel like I need to rest my voice a little bit. So I'm going to do that. Goodbye for now. I'll read more in a little bit. Thank you for listening.